Okay, the lapel mic is working. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've kind of got two sets of remarks, and I'm going to blend them together a little bit. And I asked for the lapel mic because it echoes more than the other one, so that I can wander a little bit. And if I need to, I'll stay here. But so I started with the Utah Jazz, as was mentioned, back in 1983. I had been doing their marketing and advertising from an ad agency. My father-in-law and I owned an ad agency. We knew somebody who introduced us to Sam Battistone, if we could turn it down just a little bit, who was the original owner who brought the Utah Jazz here from New Orleans back in 1979. We were introduced to him in 1981, and we started doing some marketing for him because he needed some marketing. He didn't need advertising as much as he needed marketing. And because they were fledgling, they were really struggling. And then Sam, he was always a thinker. He was trying to do something next. Decided that maybe one of the ways that you could lessen the season ticket burden on Utah season ticket holders was to take 11 games, take all the Western Conference teams, which there was 11, and you could play them in Las Vegas, and then Salt Lake, or the Utah fans, would only have to buy a 30-game package instead of a 41-game package, and we'll play 11. And so he did that. When he did that, he took his marketing director and moved him to Las Vegas, and he asked me if I would come in-house and be the marketing director. It was an absolute total disaster, taking games to Las Vegas. I was grateful they did it because it gave me a job with the Jazz. Nobody did any research, which I am a real fan of research, and I'll share that with you in a minute. Sam just did it off the cuff. There's a market that probably doesn't need any more entertainment or things to do. That's Las Vegas, and there's no home team. Nobody ever thought about that. And we sold out one game in 2 years down there during the trial, and that was against the Los Angeles Lakers when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was scheduled to break the all-time NBA scoring record. And guess where all the fans came from? Los Angeles is only a few hours away. And so here we are, the home team, and the Thomas and Mack Center is filled with all but like 20 Jazz fans. And he did. He broke the all-time scoring record playing the Utah Jazz in the Thomas Mack Center in Las Vegas, Nevada. And then it just didn't work. In 1983, we also did some research. And so as those of you who are thinking about going into business and marketing, learn and understand what research is for wherever you go or whatever position. It guided my whole 22-year career at the Jazz. Dan Jones and I became kind of hooked at the hip, and I didn't make any decisions without the research kind of as my backup. We did research in 1983, September of 1983, and it said that the public didn't like us, and they didn't trust us, and they thought ownership was not serious about building a winner. And so we wanted to dive in and find out, well, why did they feel that way? Well, one reason was, as we looked at it, was in 83, in 81, 82, they drafted Dominique Wilkins, and they traded him to Atlanta for 2 players and $1 million. The 2 players were kind of like, okay, that's fine, just give me the money, because Sam needed the money. Sam Battistone, the owner at that time. The 2 players were, some of you may have heard of one if you followed NBA sports, but Freeman Williams, who none of you have heard of, and the other one was John Drew, who was a really pure shooter. But unfortunately, John Drew let drugs control his life, and he ended up in real trouble. But we got $1 million. But we had, Dominic Wilkins could have been the Jazz player, and they gave him away to the Atlanta Hawks. So we look, okay, what happened the year before that? Well, the year before that, they had a first-round draft pick that they traded the pick before they even drafted to the Los Angeles Lakers for $1 million. And again, cash hungry, not really concerned about building a team. That draft pick, and we got $1 million and Gail Goodrich. And then the draft came, and the Lakers drafted at the Jazz position, and they drafted somebody by the name of Magic Johnson. And so now you can start to understand why the fans were saying they're not interested in building a winner. They just want, this is just a toy. They're looking to try to get cash. We took that research and we went to Sam Battistone and said, Sam, and so this is September of 1983. In June of 83, we had drafted Thurl Bailey, but we had not signed him yet because Sam didn't have money. He didn't have cash at hand. So we went to Sam, we said, we don't care what you do, you've got to go to your dad, you've got to, So Sam's father was the founder and the owner, before they sold it, of Sambo's Restaurants, which today would be like Denny's. And so his father still had wealth. Sam had wealth, but had wealth. We'll just leave it at that. And we just said, Sam, you got to go. We got to do this. We've got to sign Thurl. We've got to show the fans that we're putting a stake in the ground. We're going to make a difference. So this is a marketing guy telling the owner and the basketball side some things they've got to do because research is telling us we've got to do it. Sam found the money somewhere. They made an agreement with Thurl Bailey and his agent. And instead of having back then, press conferences were in a conference room with like 3 people. And we decided, look, this is such a big deal. We're going to do a press conference in what was then the ZCMI Mall and in the big open court area. And we publicized it for a week. Bring your brown bag lunch. We'll have free drinks. And we invited the whole city to come to this press conference where we were going to sign Thurl Bailey. Presented him with a big check, presented him with his first jersey, made it a big community event to sort of say, we're going to be different, we're going to go forward. The other reason that research said that they didn't think we were serious, they didn't like our name. We moved from New Orleans. They were the New Orleans Jazz, came to Utah. They ran a contest in the Deseret News because Wendell Ashton was one of the people who, Wendell Ashton and Fred Ball. Fred Ball was the chamber president. Wendell Ashton was the publisher and president of the Deseret News. They attracted Sam and the Jazz to come here. They ran a contest in the Deseret News and said, what would you name the team? And so I guess there were all these entries. And somebody put Utah Jazz. Sam liked the logo. He liked the colors. He liked the Mardi Gras colors. He liked the note that was also part of a basketball. And so, Sam, it was a one-person decision. And Sam said, I like that one. Mistake. It was a huge mistake. Now I'm standing here, so almost, next year will be 40 years that the team's been in the state. So Dave Checketts and I put the league on notice. This is September of '83. That next year we want to change the name and the logo. And back then the league was not very sophisticated with marketing and on all the jersey sales that goes on today. And so a year's notice was all you had to give them. Today you would have to give them probably 2 to 3 years notice, and it's $1.5 million deposit plus $1.5 million when you actually do it. It's very expensive to change your name. So we put them on notice we were going to change the name. 1983, 84, Frank Layden was Coach of the Year, J. Walter Kennedy Award winner, Ricky Green. These are going to be players that, some of them you'll hear, but Ricky Green led the league in assists. Adrian Dantley led the league in scoring. Mark Eaton led the league in block shots. And there was one more. But And we were the Midwest Division champions. We went to the playoffs for the first time in franchise history. We sold more T-shirts, bumper stickers, pens, pencils, cups, anything with hats, anything with the Jazz logo on it. We sold more memorabilia the last 3 months of the season than they had sold the 5 previous years all combined. We used to travel and people would see our name tags on our luggage as we'd arrive to hotels. Oh, you must be with the musical group. Oh, no, we're not. Just because they saw Utah Jazz and it had that note. Finally, people started knowing who the Utah Jazz were. We were on the front of Sports Illustrated twice, Sport Magazine once, ESPN did features on us. We were toast as far as changing the name. And so we pulled back our offer. We just couldn't replace all of that exposure. It would just be too costly. And so we stayed with Utah Jazz. But we used the research to do that. Let me just tell a little bit of the story about finding Larry Miller. We were always looking for cash. It was just the nature of our franchise. We didn't sell seats well. We hadn't gotten, the league had not gotten sophisticated in selling sponsorships at the prices that we are today. So Sam is always doing something. I mean, the gentleman who used to own Jeremy Ranch and what was then Canyon Racket Club, an eye doctor by the name of Jiggs Bagley, Gerald Bagley, he gave Sam $1 million for some large benefits of the Jazz. Sam did a deal with Adnan Khashoggi, who owned Triad Center downtown and was trying to come to town and do business. He got kicked out of the United States because he got caught running guns. Yeah, so yes, we did business with a gun runner. Sam owned him $1 million. I don't know, it's just being recorded now. I don't know if he ever repaid him or what happened, but it was just there was always something crazy. And so one more crazy, Dave Checketts and I were out looking for limited partnerships at $100,000 a piece. And we wanted 10, one more time to raise $1 million to be able to get us through one more year. And so we had found 4 or 5 or 6, and one of the gentlemen that Dave was introduced to was a gentleman by the name of Larry Miller, who owned a couple of car dealerships in Murray, Utah. We'd all heard of him because he had these massive TV commercial campaigns, and he said, let me think about it. He was not even a season ticket holder, called Dave back the next day and said, come meet with me. I went with Dave, and he went from being semi-interested in a $100,000 limited partnership to saying, what would it take to buy half the team? And I could take the next 2 hours talking about that year and the following year, but we'll just sort of sum it up by saying, Larry bought the team, and bought the first half and bought the second half to save the team for Utah. The second half came about because Larry and Sam were meeting with who would then become the first owners of the Minnesota Timberwolves, and they had made an offer, and they had a handshake agreement or a verbal agreement. It was a soft agreement. Oh, yeah, maybe we'll sell it for that. Larry went home and couldn't sleep all night, called Sam Battistone the next morning and said, I know you need cash. Will you give me 2 weeks to find it? And I'll buy it from you. And Larry went to work. He had no business, the banks had no business loaning him the money. Somehow they felt comfortable, and he was able to buy the team. So so all in, all done, he bought the team for between $22 and $23 million. I'll come back to that in just a minute. But when I say he bought it for Utah, it's really true, because a couple of years later, when Toronto wanted a franchise, they kept bugging him, because they wanted to bug little franchises or little smaller markets, knowing that they have a harder time financially than if you're in Los Angeles or if you're in Phoenix. So they kept bugging him and saying, sell us your team, and he said, it's not for sale. So I'm in a meeting with him at his office, which was then at the Chevrolet dealership, and his assistant brings in a Federal Express envelope. And she said, I got a phone call that this would be arriving. They said it was really urgent, and because he didn't like being interrupted, so she interrupted anyway. But he opened it up, and it was a blank check from these gentlemen in Toronto with a Post-it note on it that said, you pick the price. So he grabbed a Post-it note, put it on there. I didn't buy it to sell it. Gave it back to his assistant and said, send it back. Maybe with a couple of other words in there. So he did it for us, those of us who live and stay in Utah, because he knew that if Salt Lake and Utah lost an NBA franchise, we'd never get one back. Look at all the other major cities in the United States that would love to have a professional NBA team that they don't have one. And back then, we didn't have a New Orleans, we didn't have a Memphis, we didn't have an Oklahoma City, we didn't have a Charlotte, we didn't have a Miami. So he could have sold it, for a lot more money. Today, so dovetailing back into that price of 22, 23 million. Last year, when the some professional sports something did evaluation of professional sports team, the Utah Jazz were valued at just a little over $900 million. And of course, we can thank Steve Ballmer for that, for paying $2 million for the Clippers when they were valued at $1 million. So everything went up. Then, in the same Miller tradition, Gail Miller last year deeded over the Jazz and the arena to a legacy trust, and as a gift to Utah and to the citizens of Utah and the city of Salt Lake. It is now locked up in a trust. And so when she passes, season ticket holders and fans don't have to be worried about, oh my gosh, are the kids going to sell it? They can divide up $900 million 4 ways, and they'd all be set for life. They don't have to worry about that. It's locked up in a trust to stay and to be in Utah. And so, again, in the Miller spirit. So she just took $900 million off of her personal net worth and gave it to the fans, if you will. That is who I work with. That's who I get to report to on a daily basis nowadays. But it's been a great, what will be next year, 33 years of working for the company. For 3 years, I was a consultant to Larry Miller while I was also a mission president for the LDS Church from 2005 to 2008. But he wanted me to keep my employment so that I didn't break my tenure. So we had quarterly meetings on the phone, and I got $200 a month. So, and health insurance. So, just let me tell you a little bit about the Larry Miller Group, who we are, and because a lot of people don't realize that maybe how big we are outside of Utah. So we have 64 dealerships, and we're in 7 states. California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Idaho, and Washington. We have an insurance company. For those of you who are business students, you probably have heard the term vertical integration. Larry didn't know what that meant. He just did it. I mean, he spent, I shouldn't tell you this, but he spent, it was either 2 days or 2 hours, I got to go back and read, but on the University of Utah campus. And he said, I just want to go do it. I can't do this. And so he went and worked hard. But when he would do enough of one kind of business within what he was already doing, then he created another business. So insurance is one of those. So insurance products in the auto industry is a big deal. When you buy a car, you go to the insurance and finance office to sign all the papers. They're asking you, do you want to finance it here? Do you want some extra insurance? Do you want extra coverage? Do you want to extend your warranty? Do you want a service contract? We own that company. And that company last year almost made as much money as all 64 dealerships combined. They offer their products throughout the United States to, other automobile dealer groups, not just us. That's why they don't wear the Larry Miller name. It's called Prestige Financial. We also have a company that's called Total Care Auto. They're the ones that do the service contracts and the extended warranty contracts. We have an ad agency that I founded for Larry probably about 20 years ago. Again, we were doing enough advertising with all of our different entities that it made sense for us to bring that in and collect the commissions from all the advertising and do our own and be able to have some control over things. We have a real estate holding company. So all the dealerships sit on real estate. And rather than each dealership getting their own mortgage with the bank and paying that back, Miller family, it's now called Larry Miller Real Estate, owns that real estate, and the dealership pays their mortgage to Miller family, that's when I used to run it, Larry Miller Real Estate, and that now becomes a profitable company. Obviously the Utah Jazz, the Bees, Vivint Smart Home Arena, Megaplex Theaters, Jordan Commons, and Larry he had failures. We talk about them because it's okay, and he would tell you it's okay to make a mistake because if you don't try, you can't make a success. One of his mistakes was Miller Motorsports Park out in Tooele. It just got overbuilt. One of the last things I did for him before I left to go to Pennsylvania for 3 years was, I put on a press conference and the groundbreaking of Miller Motorsports Park. It was going to be a country club track where guys who have fast cars would like to have their own garage, be able to go out on the weekend and drive it, and maybe host a couple of close-knit tournaments, race tournaments. By the time I got back, we had this world-class road track that was unbelievable. Problem is that we just don't have enough people in Utah to be able to pay for it. The good news was Larry paid cash for everything, and so we had no debt. The other good news, which is I thought was, I couldn't understand why we built the track on land owned by the county and the city when just to the east of it, he had 1,000 acres of land to develop in case he wanted to do something different. Why didn't you build it over there? And he didn't have that answer. But when it came time to liquidate it, it was nice because when you build on somebody else's property, it becomes a leasehold improvement, it becomes their property. So we just went to Tooele and gave them the keys and said, we're done. And all the buildings of the bricks, and it was all theirs, and we didn't have to worry about selling it. It was a big loss, but it also ended up being a real benefit. Now let me, we could talk about the early days of the Jazz forever. But, so I'm going to fast forward to when Larry was in the hospital in July of 2008, he had a heart attack. And let me insert here, take care of yourselves. If it's okay to eat junk food, but walk or do some exercise to counteract that. Larry had diabetes. He knew he had diabetes. He knew he should exercise, but he didn't. He knew he should eat better, but he didn't. Here's a guy, he's a billionaire, right? And he clips coupons out of the mailers that came, and he would give us the coupons to his assistant, and his favorite was Taco Bell. And she would go to Taco Bell and get him the bean and meat burrito and 2 hard shell tacos. And that was his lunch, a lot of the times. And Gail Miller would say that she was mad at him for it because we could have been prevented. He could have curbed his diabetes. But then he had a heart attack, and then it exacerbated things. They had to inject him with iodine to find where the heart was clogged. The iodine shut down the kidneys. It was a domino effect, and 9 months later he passed away. He could have stopped it. when he was in the hospital bed in July of 2009, he and I were really close. And he said, Jay, I want to share something with you. He said, I shared it with the family last night, and I really want to tell you what it is. And if you've read Larry's book or if you've looked into his life or the family, you've heard this. But the moniker is, go about doing good till there's too much good in the world. He said, that's what we need to be about. And he said, I need your help. I said, okay. He said, that's what the company and the family need to never forget. And he didn't know he was going to die. He was still recovering from a heart attack. You know, had a heart attack 3 weeks before. And I said, okay, let's see what we can do. And then I went on and was in charge of the operations of the whole Larry Miller Group. I then took on the real estate, you know, and then Greg Miller became the CEO. And we were just trudging through business. And then we reorganized here about 5 years ago. And I found myself in a situation where I'm now overseeing the Larry H. Miller Education Foundation, which is all of the children of Larry Miller employees have their education paid for up to $10,000 a year and books for 5 years. So all 4 of the Francis children have had their education paid for by the Larry Miller Group. With the exception of 3 semesters, I have 3 sons. So you have to have a 2.5. And for whatever reason, my 3 sons all thought that the first semester of college was to have fun. They didn't get a 2.5, so Dad had to pay for the next semester to get it up so they could get back on the Miller grant. But we're grateful for all the other semesters. And this year we have over 300 students who are going to it's over 80 colleges or universities throughout the United States that are on the Larry Miller Scholarship Plan. The Larry H. and Gail Miller Family Foundation, which is the family giving. The Larry H. Miller Charities, which is our company giving. Each entity in the company contributes to Larry H. Miller Charities. We are kind of our own United Way in that we encourage employees to give to Larry H. Miller Charities, and Gail Miller, for the last 4 years, matches that. So if I give $5 out of my paycheck, Gail gives $5. And that money goes back to wherever the employees live and work. So if it comes from Boise, it goes back to Boise. What else? Then there's a Driven to Teach, which is a program that Larry started. He loved our country so much, and he just revered the founding fathers because he felt like the freedom that we have in America to be able to do what we do gave him the freedom to be able to be an entrepreneur and to be able to do what he did. And so he just had this great love for the founding fathers and our history. He also realized that from a friend of his by the name of David McCullough, who you may have heard of, that most of our history teachers and social studies teachers they have a textbook knowledge. And so Larry said, well, let's fix that. And so we send 90 teachers in 3 different groups to U.S. history sites for 7 days with pedagogy specialists and professors to teach them for 7 days hands-on about American history. And they come back in the classroom, and they are, we hear testimonials from them all the time, that they're able to be better history teachers because they went to Boston and Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., and this year we've got some going to the South. And they take pictures, and when they're teaching their class, they put their pictures up in the classroom, and they say, oh, Mrs. Jones or Mr. Smith knows what he's talking about. He's been to the bridge where Paul Revere rode across. And it just makes them better. So that's one of the things we do. The family also has a diversity scholarship at the University of Utah, where Larry wanted. So these are students who would never, ever be able to be at college if it wasn't for this scholarship. President Pershing tells me that it's their best scholarship on campus. full tuition, housing, employment for 2 years, and food and meals just to get kind of 4.5 years to get them out of their into their next degree or into graduation. And so now, being over philanthropy, those are the things that I work with every day, and giving back. Two things I want to share, and then we're going to open it up for questions. One is I want to go back to business. Some of you are probably approaching graduation, and some of you may be sophomores, juniors, and look for opportunity wherever you're going. Look for opportunities for internships, and even if it doesn't pay well, you get an education that you can't get on campus. You're hands-on, even if it's making copiers for the chief marketing officer or the chief financial officer. You just, by osmosis, you learn some things and have some experience that you can't get anywhere else. We hired at the Jazz interns quite often. A lot of those interns became directors of public relations, directors of marketing, directors of sale, became vice presidents. I hired, and the other thing is you've still got to go out and work. I don't care if you get a great degree or if you go on and get a master's degree. If you don't work, your degree's worthless. You might as well quit now if you're not going to go work hard. I hired a young man. We moved into, it was just after we moved into the Delta Center, what was then the Delta Center. I had this idea. I wanted to put people on the phones to call out. We had some database and make calls. I also wanted them on the phone to answer phone calls from our advertising. And then I also, this was the genesis, the beginning of operators standing by during a Jazz game. And I went and created with the phone company 355 Dunk, and we plastered that everywhere. And it was the best known phone number in Utah, except for Domino's at that time had a campaign, and Domino's number was better than mine. Domino's had a one number, and it didn't matter which location you wanted, you dial one number, they would get you to the closest location to your home. We even ran a sketchy billboard campaign for a while that said, for a good time, call 355 Dunk. We got some interesting calls, but we also sold a lot of tickets. A gentleman applied for that job for director or phone room manager, and I said, I can't hire you. You're too overqualified. He was working at Fidelity at the time, graduated with a bachelor's in business from the University of Utah, went back to Boston and got a master's. I said, this may not even work. I'm looking for somebody to shepherd, 6 to 8 part-time people in weird hours. And incessantly called me. I said, okay, you're signing your own death certificate, possibly. He went to work. He turned that into a machine. Our ticket office manager quit. I promoted him to phone room manager, ticket office manager. I needed a new director of ticket sales, phone room, box office manager, ticket sales. He was the president of the Utah Jazz interim for a while we were reorganizing. Today he's the president of Vivint Smart Home Arena. His name's Jim Olson. He was willing to work. And I contrast that with a friend of mine whose son came out of MBA school, and he kind of came out and he said, okay, where's my $80,000 job? The kid still cannot hold down a decent part-time job, been in and out of rehab 4 times in the last 6 years because he wasn't willing to work. So when you get your degree, work harder than you've ever worked before, and let the degree be a reason they'll even interview you, but then go and prove why they made the right decision. The other thing is, kind of tying philanthropy together, is that there needs to be more courses taught in business schools that business and philanthropy is really tightly tied. It endears a business to a community. It gets a business really involved in understanding what the community is all about. And there are benefits that come back that you can't even measure. Gail, we had to do some major cutbacks in 2008, 9, and 10. And we're having to let a number of employees go because all the businesses have gotten fat in 6 and 7 when things were really good, and now we were overstaffed in a number of our entities. And Gail went to Greg Miller, who was the CEO at the time. She said, I know we have to make some changes, and I know we've got to reserve cash, but you have to set aside, and this was a 7-digit number, this amount of money for me to give every year. And he said, Mom, do you realize we have to do it? And he said, okay. And so we reserved that amount of money, and somehow we were able to do it. And we had 1 month where we had red numbers. 1 month in 2 years of really bad, and during those times, we bought 7 dealerships because the other dealerships weren't as prepared for the downturn as Larry had us prepared. Because Larry would never buy a dealership if he couldn't pay cash for the blue sky, the business. He was willing to finance real estate because if he ever had to, he could sell that. We were prepared. Others weren't. We were able to capitalize and buy, and we were able to grow the company during a time when everybody else was trying to, hold on to their jobs. Gail will tell you, it's not why she did it, but she'll tell you that the reason that happened is because she continued to give. Arthur Brooks gave a talk at BYU a number of years ago. It's titled, and you could Google it if you're interested. It's called Why Giving Matters. He said he heard a quote by Rockefeller, who said, I am rich because I give. He was a doctorate of economics. And he said, nah. He said, I can't have my economics 101 class come in and say, okay, if you want to be rich, give your money away. He said, that doesn't make sense. It's just not possible. So he studied it, and he took Rockefeller, he took Kennedy's, he took a number of other entrepreneurial, wealthy families and individuals, and he studied them. His conclusion was, they're right. They are wealthy because they give. And for Mrs. Miller, Gail, she doesn't worship the dollar. It's not, she believes that they're blessed with it so that they can do good in the community. I shared with you what Larry's kind of mantra was. Gail's is, the communities where we do business should be better because we're there. And the family and the business, they don't have a jet. They don't have vacation homes in 4 different places. They have a cabin in Idaho. It may be a little more than a cabin, but I've only seen pictures. But that's, they just don't have all this stuff. And they're really, as a family, they really just want to make things better. They want everybody to have a fair chance. And Gail's really passionate right now about homeless and education and, making, and again, a woman who didn't graduate from the university because she didn't have that opportunity. So I feel really privileged, I should say. I mean, when Larry shared that with me and said, I need your help, I had no idea that I would be in charge of all of the philanthropy for the family, for the company, for Gail personally. And now within the last few months, I'm also the executive director of the Miller Family Office, which is a family office where we're trying to make sure that the family lives on with all these values and character that Gail and Larry have set up. Let me just stop there, and because we've got about 8 minutes, and just take questions if there are any.
You said one of your biggest failures when you were over
Fortunately, I wasn't over the failure was that they didn't do any research. When it didn't work, and if they had gone into Las Vegas and researched and said, should we come in here and play 11 games? Would you come and support us? I'm sure research would have said, overwhelmingly no. And so that would be one of the lessons that I learned, that. Now, do I think that the Jazz should have changed? And the other one was making a name change. Sam should have changed the name. In the early, obviously we can't do it now, but we tried with a logo switch about 20 years ago, but they should have changed. There were no Rockies. You've got the Colorado Rockies. We could have been the Salt Lake Rockies. I have said to classes like this on almost every university campus, years ago, when they talk about that was a mistake, we would have been better off to have been the Salt Lake Brine Shrimp than the Utah Jazz. At least it was indigenous, and it was local. But in the early days, Mardi Gras colors, the name, the jazz music wasn't indigenous. It was a mistake. We've grown through that, but we would have been better to have had a name where the people could say, this is my team. Other questions? Yes?
So what's the best way that you would suggest for young people without a lot of money to be philanthropic?
I don't know if y'all, what's the best way for young people who don't have a lot of money, like me, to be philanthropic? I think there's service. It's not always about giving dollars, but sometimes you can give your time. You can go to the food bank. There's a great, probably a really model homeless facility in Utah County in Provo. It's called the Food and Care Coalition. They do a wonderful job with the way they handle the homeless. They have transitional housing, not short-term housing, but so giving service or giving $5. And to some place that you feel passionate about, and maybe you get some friends, and you kind of each put in $5, and now you have $50, and that makes a little bit more of a dent. But doing something, I think it's kind of the spirit, and then someday you'll be able to do more. We give our kids a little cash at Christmas, and then we give them 2 envelopes. This is something you can go put in your bank, and this is something, tell us where you're going to go do some good. I guess a little start, and I wish I had learned that when I was your age. So. Yes?
So, Driven is a really inspiring book. I'm sure a lot of people here have read it. You kind of touched on it as well, but Larry seemed to have this way of going in and getting funding when no one else could, like coming up with $22 million to buy the Jazz when he just had a few dealerships. Can you give us some insight beyond what Driven does on what his secret was for going in and building these amounts of money to go in and make an investment?
Excuse me. Yeah, I think my answer would not only be on funding, but I think it answers a lot of other, and that's relationships. Larry had good relationships with his banks. He was never late. He would brag about that he would pay off his debt early, and he had this photographic memory. He could tell you each dealership and how much he owned on the real estate of that dealership, and that he would tell you, and on the Toyota Murray one, I paid that off 5 years earlier, So it was relationships and being honest, and that people could trust him. But I've never needed to go do that. But I have found in my what I'm doing now that relationships are just huge. It'll open doors, and people will trust you. And so the way you do that is get involved in the community. serve on boards. They read some of the, so I'm on the I'm vice chair and for 3 more months, and then I'll be chair of the United Way of Salt Lake. I'm chairman of EDC Utah, Economic Development Corporation. I was chair for 6 years for Sandy Area Chamber of Commerce. I'm chairman of Anti-Bowling Coalition, served on all these boards, and it just, I've gone to lots of rubber chicken dinners at galas, which I will be at one tonight at Little America. And I've learned it's not about the chicken or the whatever. I make sure that I've become really good friends with Scott Anderson, the president CEO of Zions Bank. And I can name lists, and Kem Gardner, because of relationships. And so when you have the relationship, people will tend to look past the balance sheet, and they're looking at trust, and we just trust you. We have faith in you. And I think that's what Larry had developed. We got maybe a minute and a half, or maybe we don't, but I got to tell you that, yes?
What books would you recommend for us to, get?
What book would I recommend?
Books, yeah, books.
If you haven't read Larry's book Driven, I would read that. And I've always said if I was a business professor, it would be required reading in my class, because it's the basics. This is an oldie but a goodie, because I've just recently had to teach it to a staff member. It's really old. I wish they would update it, especially some of the pictures. But Dress for Success. And I think that you millennials need that. It was culture shock for my son to go to work for Merit Medical in sales, selling medical products, and they have a rigid dress standard. They want them to look like you, they've loosened up. They can actually wear a colored shirt now. But that was for my millennial son. It was like, oh my gosh, Dad, you won't believe it. And I said, yeah, I believe it. But so, for me, that was really a great book. And not only just, I am dressed in a shirt and tie today because 2 reasons. I'm going to be with you today, and I'm also being interviewed for a video to honor Gail Miller. And I think you act the way you feel, and when you feel professional, you act professional. Tomorrow is dress down day for us, and I'll probably have Levi's on and a colored shirt, and I won't feel like a business executive. And so I think that's a great book. I think maybe ignore the pictures in it, because some of those little tiny paisley ties. Anyway, thank you.